It's been described as the best way to make sure your family keeps fighting long after you're gone. Who's allowed to live in the house and for how long? Who gets Grandad's war medals? Should the child who was also the caregiver get more of a share? I'm talking about wills and what happens when there isn't one. And you should be talking about wills too. If you don't have one, if you've got married, had kids or divorced since you last made one, if you have a gold bar under the mattress or a secret stash that no one else knows about. Because if you don't make your wishes clear, those who survive you have their work cut out for them.
We're in this grieving process and we didn't know what to do, and we were really looking for some guidance around what are her wishes, what does she want with her possessions, and we were really left holding the bag.
I'm Alexia Russell, and today on The Detail I'll talk to a couple who learnt the hard way about what can happen when someone dies without a will, and also to Kat Simpson from the Public Trust about Wills Week, which starts today.
So at the moment it's about half of adult New Zealanders don't have a will, which is quite startling when you think about the importance. What we know is that by the time people get to the point of passing away, 1 in 10 people in New Zealand die without a will. So their estate is administered in what we call intestate, which basically means it's down to the rules of the law as to how it'll be distributed.
So what are people's reasons for not bothering with a will? They think they're not going to die, or they just think they have enough stuff?
It probably changes a little bit with age. So I would say there's an invincibility in younger New Zealanders that I don't need to think about, it's not time yet. We did some research recently, and 1 in 5 people over 55 said it was just too emotionally hard to talk about it. They didn't want to talk about it with their loved ones. They didn't want to talk about it with us. It's just a big topic. It's a little bit like death, money, future, taxes. Let's not make eye contact with it because it's tricky. But it's a real shame because actually not doing it is a burden on your family. I like to think of writing a will as being kind of the greatest gift you can give to people once you've gone.
Later, Kat will run through the options on how you can make a will easily and cheaply. But first, Aucklanders we'll call Jay and Rachel. Rachel wrote to me about what she calls a huge flaw in New Zealand's outdated legal system, and one that hurts the people left behind, especially kids. They're still sorting through issues 3 years after Jay's sister Lizzie died suddenly.
We couldn't find a will, and we were in a grieving place, and we didn't know what to do, and the first thing we did was try and find a will, and we were just hoping and hoping that something would eventuate, and it didn't. We had to go to her house and clean it out and move everything out. We had to pay her bills, we had to cover her rent and leave enough there for her bond and things like that. There's a lot of bills that pop up.
You pay for a funeral as well?
Yeah, we paid for her funeral. There's a lot of bills and there's a lot of expense when it comes to dying that you don't know about. Yeah, we kind of got a crash course in that.
And she died young?
So she died suddenly at 39. That was a tragedy in itself because it wasn't something any of us saw happening. I still remember the phone call from my husband, I couldn't believe it. You just don't believe it. And yeah, we were just in shock and we were grieving and we were trying to navigate this process, and unfortunately she had this loose end, which was essentially that she had an ex-spouse. She'd left a year before her passing. They both had separate relationships, new relationships. It was very evident to everyone that they were separated, but unfortunately, due to a loophole that he was able to exploit, he was able to take all of her estate, essentially, and rob their 2 kids, essentially, of their inheritance. Yeah.
So what happened in the end? Has he now had to also take responsibility for the children?
He is responsible for the children, and we are very supportive of that because something that Lizzie taught us and showed us was that she wanted things to be amicable with their father, and that was really important to her, so we really carried that on. And we knew that she wanted him to be a part of their lives, and that was really important to her. And she was the person who was always reaching out to him when they were separated and making the effort. So we've carried that legacy on, and we've said that he's their dad, he's the best person to raise them because he's their biological father. And what good looks like to different people is completely different, right? So he's looking after them, and we believe he should have resources to support them and enable them to have a prosperous life as children do and give them the opportunities. But we've been given no transparency over that. So he has all of her resources, all of her assets, and we don't know what's been used for what.
But you do suspect that it is not all being used for the good of the kids.
Yeah. I mean, you give someone this amount of resources, greed takes over.
Lizzie had taken out a substantial life insurance policy right before she died, and that was clearly meant for the children. Rachel and Jay don't know much about the spending since Lizzie died, but what the couple does know is that the ex has gone from living in a garage to buying some big-ticket items, including a boat, a new car and a house. Rachel says the children have been left with no mother, no security and no inheritance. And Jay says Lizzie's ex is now the administrator of her estate.
It's a tremendous amount of information that the administrator has access to in order to close down the estate and process that estate. Now, I think a lot of people would find it uncomfortable to share that level of information with an ex-partner in any circumstances. They can not only receive the estate, but manage everything to do with the estate. And there's a lot of personal information that needs to be made available for that to happen. So where that was a really big issue for us was just preserving her dignity throughout this and making sure that she was actually had some sort of representation, because in this situation we find she quickly becomes an estate, not the person that we knew and loved.
But the former husband is just doing what the law says he can.
The children do benefit from these things, I believe, but because it leaves them with something, but I don't think that it's necessarily fair while they're minors to be spending this money for this reason without their input.
If Lizzie had had a will, what do you think would have been different?
I think we would have been able to grieve a bit more because we would have had the clarity of how to navigate this whole messy situation. It's really torn our family apart in a lot of ways because we want what's best for the kids and we don't know what she wanted, and we're not mind readers and we don't know if we're doing the right thing. We're constantly asking ourselves, like Jay's constantly asking himself, is this what she would have wanted? And it's really, really hard. It's really hard because it's their legacy that they leave behind, and I want to emphasise that we don't want anything out of this. We received compensation for her funeral and we've put that aside because that's something that her money is her money to us. We don't want anything out of this. We just want the kids to be looked after. Yeah. And
did you have to get lawyers involved?
We have had to get lawyers involved. We've spoken to maybe 3 different lawyers and spent money on that. Yeah.
And what was the outcome? You're sort of finding that the law is completely on his side.
Exactly. Yeah, the law is on his side. He's able to exploit the fact that under the court they are still together. They're still together under the eyes of the law. And that's heartbreaking because any honest, moral person would say no, put their hands up and say, no, we weren't together anymore. This is what she would have wanted for our kids. But, yeah.
And had they been officially divorced, that situation would have been different?
Yes, it would have been a bit easier to navigate, yeah, absolutely. And I think there's almost like this little purgatory space of, I'm sure, plenty of people who are in the situation where they're in the process of separating, because separating takes time. It takes 2 years, and these people aren't being looked after. If they pass suddenly, then you think that the law's going to save you, but there's no safety net there. There's nothing there.
Unless you make a will.
Unless you make a will, yeah.
But most of us, it seems, can't be bothered doing that. Kat Simpson says we should. and we should look at it again every time we have a big life change.
When you start travelling, when you start accumulating KiwiSaver, when you get married, when you have children, if something in your relationship changes, maybe you get a new partner, you move house, you buy investment properties, you move overseas. Like, there's hundreds of things that happen in life where suddenly the circumstances change. And I think about myself now, and I think about myself 20 years ago when I wrote that first will, and I go, yeah, life's a little bit different looking.
And if you don't think you have anything to redistribute, think again.
It's probably still worth thinking about, depending on how many other intangible assets you've got. So have you got a cookbook collection from your grandma? Have you got priceless watches that come from your granddad? But otherwise, $15,000 is kind of the rule of thumb that we use to say it's best to get something formal written up.
What about, do people get put off by the cost or the red tape?
We do get feedback on cost. I think it's a perception to me of value. So I can speak to our prices better than others, but at Public Trust, if you go online, you can write a will from anywhere from $85 to just over $200, depending on your circumstances and how many things we need to take into consideration.
So what you just give your general what you want to happen, and some lawyer knocks it into shape online?
You fill it online and you answer all the questions, then it produces a will that you get witnessed.
Okay.
So it's the same way that we would write if you came to see one of our team in centre. They would ask you a series of questions and they would create a will for you. It uses the same type of approach, but you can do it, from your couch and your sweatpants, which a lot of people quite like, because then you don't have to talk to anyone about the tricky and uncomfortable things.
And are people taking that offer up?
Yeah, we see absolutely a growing number of New Zealanders who are writing wills and enduring power of attorney online with us. So in terms of price, there's definitely a perception of a barrier, but I think about that and I go $85 to $200 versus the thousands of additional cost and, to be honest, heartache to get to the point of end of life and not have a will. And then I think about the impact of that on people. So we have had some pretty gnarly situations where we've had customers who've died without wills. And so I'll tell you about a specific incident that really was quite heartbreaking for me. So we had this beautiful woman in her 30s, and she had 3 children with her partner. She had been married in her early 20s to another person, and they'd never formally got divorced. So she didn't write a will. She got to that point where she passed away, very unfortunately, survived by her 3 kids and her new partner. But because of the way that the Administration Act is written, the money in her estate and the items in her house went to her husband from her 20s, who she hadn't seen in many years. So
kids missed out.
The kids missed out. And so it's a tricky time to feel like you can afford that few $100s to write a will. Like, I completely feel that. But actually, I don't think that's the outcome she would have wanted. And so I think about that compared to that few $100s, and I go, what are your options and how can you save and who can help you and what does that look like? And that's one of the reasons why we are really committed to having options for people at different price points so that as many people as they can access something.
What happens in situations like that where there's a sort of, I guess you'd say, a moral injustice taking place? How many people who have been on the receiving end of this good fortune, how many of them say, actually, that isn't fair, here's the money back?
Yeah, it's tricky in that the ex-husband, who wasn't fully divorced, but I'm going to call them the ex for our sake, did offer 50% back to the children, but didn't have to. So we see a bit of a mixed bag. I would say when it comes to money, I would just rather be in control of what was going to happen than have that be up to someone else's good graces to offer it back.
Did you know that if you have a will and then you get married or have a civil union, your will is automatically revoked? So if you die, the situation is treated as if you don't have a will at all. There are other legalities that can trip you up too.
One of the big things that we see is that people have a real sense of faith that if they give some level of instruction or write some type of will, that everything else will work its way out. So, for example, we've seen families where there's adult children living at home with the parents or with one of them, and they've wanted to be very equal and fair. So they've said, if I was to die, all 3 of my children will get a third of my estate. Absolutely fine. That's it. Kept it really simple. And look, having a will is better than having no will, always. But because the adult child has lived with them for so long, there isn't a provision for what happens. So in essence, at the time of dying, the adult child doesn't have an agreed time frame to stay in the property or options, or it's very much if we need to sell it in order to split it three ways, because you can't all just get a third of a house physically. I'll take the garage and you take the kitchen.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. So
but can you come to your own arrangements, or is legally do you have to obey the terms of the will?
You can come to your own arrangements, and families often do, particularly where siblings have a really great relationship. The tricky thing we see is if that's not the case, or there might be step siblings involved, or there might be new partners, it's better to have planned for that. So in instances like that, often what we see is people saying, a person might have the right to live in the house for a certain period, like 2 years, or until such time as they decease, and then people will get the residue of that, or the remaining amount. So that's why getting the advice when you've got different dynamics in your family is really important, because you can get the advice on what do I do with the asset right now, and then how should I write my will in the best way to make sure they're protected. And some of that's not cookie cutter, and it's very personal. We hear quite a lot that people have a perception of what is going to happen, and they tell us, well, mum said this and dad said this, and it's not recorded anywhere, it's not written down, and so it's very difficult to follow that through. So the more conversations are had, the more people, to be honest, even include supplementary information to their will, because often your will is, what do I want to do with my assets and the stuff that I've got in my house, and like testamentary decisions for my kids. So things like where do they go to school and who are they living with and input into that, all really big things. What do I want in my funeral arrangements? What do I want to happen to certain personal items? How do I want my photos and my music collection to be stored? What do I want to happen with particular charities and organisations I've been involved in? Like, there's quite a lot more that's really personal to people. And so while a lot of that is covered off in a will, we also encourage people to talk about it. We have a product called a statement of wishes, where basically you can add supplementary wishes. So they're not a kind of legal instruction as such, but they create colour for your family and friends around, like, what else was important to me? The guidance that I give my friends, who I'm often out there saying, please write your will. If there's one gift I can give you for your birthday, please write a will, is written down and spoken about is better than people filling information with assumptions.
Right.
I mean, I joke with my two older sisters that it's, if one of us was to get something different in the will, would one of us have been mum's favourite? Like that feeling of being important and being valued and being acknowledged is often what the will represents for people, or at least what they tell us. So it is very much about being considerate of all those things, which is why I think so many people are slightly afraid to tackle the conversation, because it almost feels like you're bringing that forward.
Mum also will say, now, listen, dear, in my will, but Mum, don't talk about that. You've got plenty of years left.
Yeah. Nothing's going to happen to you, don't worry. Yes. The other thing that we find is that people will wait until they get sick to write a will. And then the really tricky thing about that is they're grappling with talking to their family about their prognosis and how things are going, and also what they're planning for in terms of funeral arrangements, and then what they want to happen with their things and their pets as well. And it becomes quite overwhelming, and you're asking people to take on quite a lot at the same time. So I think sometimes when you can step it out, when you're not already in the situation of it being a difficult conversation, it takes a little bit of load off. One of the things we also see quite often is that people will write a will and then just not get around to signing it because they will pass away in the intervening period. And again, while there's a process to go through and validate, and was it reasonable that those were their last wishes, it's still an extra step. And so I think if you start that a little bit earlier, then hopefully you don't run into that situation a bit later on.
So mostly we've talked about the dangers of not writing a will is the disputes, basically, over property, over who gets what. But are there other dangers? I mean, stuff you didn't know they had, hidden bank accounts, a property that they've had for years and never visited. Do you see a lot of that stuff as well?
We definitely see some interesting communication between family members. One that springs to mind is we had a gentleman who passed away, and he had a TAB account with quite a lot of thousands in it, and his wife just wasn't aware that it existed. There wasn't anything untoward about it, and it had been coming out of a bank account, which was how we located it when we looked at the bank statements. But it did speak to, in that case, a positive, like, oh, okay, that's an extra bonus of what I thought I might get. But yes, there's definitely some interesting things. We have also seen some New Zealanders like to keep their money and their assets kind of at home with them rather than in the bank. So we've
just check under those mattresses.
Yeah. So we've gone into a few mattresses and a few floorboards and a few cupboards and found money and personal items that are really valuable. And so again, sometimes that individual's been living on their own and their family member didn't know that they wanted to put a few $1,000 under the mattress. So yeah, there's definitely some surprises that happen. We see everything from the person who's got the folder with every statement and every provider and every utility put into it, and then the family was surprised that there were gold bars in the house that no one knew they'd purchased, and kind of everything in the middle. So again, the communication of what you're expecting and where things are is really helpful for the executor, because the executor is trying to navigate through all of this, keep everybody up to date with what's happening, kind of corral all of the assets into one place, and then kind of figure out who will be getting what. And it's much easier when you don't get any sort of untoward surprises.
Any surprises. So if people don't know that someone has a will, how do they know where to find it?
Yeah, so when people write wills with us online, we get them to try and note where they plan to store the will, which doesn't always happen. We always encourage people to, particularly their witnesses and things, tell them I'm going to store this in the middle drawer at home. But Public Trust, what we do is we actually do a will search. So we go out and we publicise and see whether we can find a later copy of a will.
So it might be in some lawyer's office in the place you used to live, kind of thing.
So we will advertise through the Law Society, and others will as well, to kind of go, is there something else out there? And then, wait and see what the response is.
It's true that you can grab a will kit or write down your wishes and get two people who aren't beneficiaries to witness it. But again, that often means more legal proceedings for those tidying things up after you die.
It does require a little bit more effort to go through that process and to be confirmed, but I always like to say that something written down is better than nothing, even if it's not completely witnessed in the right way, though we would encourage people to get it finished, because the extra cost of doing that is, when balanced against the cost of writing a will, I'd say writing a will is actually still a more cost-effective decision in that sense, and you've got the assurance that it says what you want it. Yeah.
Jay and Rachel wish they knew what Jay's sister wanted, and that's why they're talking to me today.
One of the other things to do with the not just assuming that it will be all good is that she was an incredibly busy, hard-working person who was primary caregiver for those two kids, trying to make a go of getting a career and getting a future sorted for them. And as can be the case for a lot of people, I think the admin of having to do a will just becomes one of those points of admin that just slips and slips and slips, and it can be the last thing that people get around to, but it's really critically important.
I think it shocks people that an ex-spouse can receive an entire estate, money, chattels, your clothes, they can have it all. So go and make a will, do the right thing for your family.
That's all for today. The Detail is a newsroom production supported by RNZ and New Zealand On Air. This episode was engineered by Alex Harmer and produced by Gwen McClure. Thanks to Kat Simpson and Rachel and Jay, whose names have been changed because there are children involved. I'm Alexia Russell. Ka kite anō.